Hey guys, welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Charlotte and today we are going to be doing my August reading wrap up. This has been one of my best reading months in a long time. I'm hoping that I'll be able to insert these stats somewhere. I've literally just switched over to using Fable and I am currently importing all of my Goodreads stats, so future Charlotte, do your thing, insert all of that information here. Okay, so I wasn't able to get the stats from Fable. I don't know if that's because I've imported in data, but whatever. Some of the stats that I made myself. So I read 9 books this month. 3.5 of those were physical books. The half means I have the physical copy and I also have the Kindle, so I read a bit of both. 5.5 on my Kindle. 3 of the books that I read this month were fantasies. 1 of the books I read this month was a contemporary fiction, and I read 5 romances as well. The longest it took me to read a book was 4 days, and the shortest it took me to read a book was 2 days. But for the time being, I'm just gonna jump into the books that I read this month because, as I said, it was a super good month and I'm really happy with everything that I read. So I spent a lot of the first half of this year in a reading slump, and I think I've mentioned in a couple videos now that I truly feel like I am well and truly out of the reading slump. So I did read 9 books this month, which I'm so happy with. I do work a full-time job as well. I work, just for a little bit of context, I do work a 4-day week, but I work 8 AM till 6 PM, so it is a longer day. I still work a 40-day week even with the 4 days. But let's just jump into things. I kicked the month off by finishing Wildfire by Hannah Grace. I really enjoyed this and I am absolutely loving this series so much. I went straight from Icebreaker at the end of July straight into Wildfire, and yeah, I absolutely adored this. I did give it a 4 stars. If you aren't familiar with this book, it is part of the Maple Hills University series, which the first 3 that we have so far follow hockey players on the Maple Hills University team. So in this we have Russ, who we get an introduction to in Icebreaker, and Aurora, who is just a student at Maple Hills. We don't see her in Icebreaker or anything, and they are at a summer camp, but they actually meet at a party before they get to the summer camp. Or they have a one-night stand, and then they get to the summer camp and there's a no star fraternization rule, and obviously they've already fraternized. It makes it a little bit tense. They know they have that chemistry and they did like each other, so we then kind of follow their journey with figuring out their own thoughts towards relationships. Aurora is someone that very much she loves romance books, but it's not something she's ever felt like she could have herself. And then Russ has a lot of family issues that kind of causes some issues with how he perceives the idea of him having those kind of relationships, I suppose. So it's really interesting. I really enjoyed the characters. I found Aurora quite a relatable character, and just how the story was as a whole, it was really interesting. So the next book I picked up was a Kindle Unlimited read, and I haven't got a physical copy for it, and that is Live Ranch Love by Emma Lucy. So this was a 3.5 stars for me after I reflected on this. So let me see what I can remember about this book, because one of the reasons it became 3.5 stars is because it's not a book that stuck with me a huge amount. I know the other character, that character is also called Aurora, because I was like, what are the chances I pick up 2 books back to back with a main character called Aurora? And she goes to stay on her great aunt's ranch that she has just inherited. Following her aunt's passing, she caught her partner cheating on her, literally Colin Firth style. She came back from the funeral of the great aunt and caught her partner in bed with someone else. I cannot imagine how horrific that would be. But it leads her to the ranch, and she is a wellness influencer as well, so she's really struggling work-wise. How is she supposed to put all of this positivity out into the world when she's going through such a negative time? And we definitely focus quite a lot on that throughout the book as well. When she gets to the ranch, of course she has to meet the grunchy, it should be a word at this point, the grumpy ranch hand, because of course all of these cowboy romances have one, and they obviously are not getting on, but we do start to see that kind of attraction coming through. One thing that I did really like about this book was the fact that there was more to it with the attraction side of things. I think sometimes, I love Elsie Silver, don't get me wrong, but like when the attraction, especially as in the male POV, it's really sexualized from like that initial attraction, whereas the kind of attraction was a lot softer in Live, Branch, Love, which I really liked. And it was still super spicy. Like I kind of wasn't expecting it because of how much softer it was, and then when the spice happened I was like whoa, because it did get very spicy. But yeah, a 3.5, really easy read, read it in like 2 days, so that's always a good thing. So going in on from Live, Branch, Love, I wanted to stick with a romance, but I didn't want to go with another like cowboy romance, so I decided to give the Windy City series a try. Now, I have heard so much about the first book in the series, Mile High, just not being particularly good. Which sounds awful, but yeah, people just not loving it like crazy amounts. So I actually did decide to go ahead and skip Mile High and go straight into The Right Move, and I'm really happy with that decision. You do get to see the characters from Mile High throughout The Right Move, and I definitely understand like from that already, and that alone, like the problems that people have with the MMC. I don't think I would have enjoyed Mile High, I'm not gonna lie, but I did really enjoy The Right Move. So The Right Move follows Ryan Shay, who is actually the basketball playing brother of Stevie, who is the FMC in the first book. And in the first book they had been living together, and it means that there is a spare room in Ryan's place. Indy is Stevie's best friend, and she's also just caught her partner cheating on her, because clearly that is an epidemic that's happening in these books, and she needs a place to stay. So Stevie says that she can stay at Ryan's. Ryan isn't too happy about this, because the thing with Ryan is he is so focused on basketball. Like, it is all he thinks about, it's all he cares about, it's all he's cared about for the longest time, because of some trauma that happened during his time at college, which you find out more about as the book goes on, and it is heartbreaking, this poor man. But because of that, he becomes very closed off, very just into playing basketball, and forgets like anything about a family life, which is causing him problems with his team manager, because his team manager is basically like, I don't understand how you can be our captain when you don't have like a life, basically, which is so harsh. But it ends up basically leading them down the road of fake dating, and that is definitely one of my favourite tropes in a book. I love a bit of fake dating, I think it's so fun, and we basically kind of explore how that goes, and we see quite a bit of character development in this, which is something I really like in a romance book, when we do see our main characters growing. My big issue with this was the last 100 pages were just like getting really unrealistic, is what I would say. I like a romance book that feels realistic and comes to a very realistic ending, where like maybe a couple is just kind of getting together and we get to see them settled. I don't necessarily like books where like you then get like all of this other stuff. I don't know why, I like to leave more of that to my imagination. That's just personal preference. So I definitely just found like the last 100 pages just didn't really do it for me, but at the same time I really like the characters, and I do think Ryan Shay might be one of my favourite MMCs that has ever happened, and I gave that book bang on 4 stars. So by this point I had read a lot of romance books back to back including in July as well, so I decided to go on to more of just like a contemporary fiction, and I read Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I am a really big fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this has been the only one left on my TBR of her books for quite some time now, so that's why I decided to pick it up, and I did enjoy it. So this is about Hannah, who has no home, no career, and she doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life. So she eventually decides that she's going to move back to Los Angeles, where she is from, after moving from city to city to city after finishing college. So the book starts on her move back to LA. So we see that she goes to stay with her friend Gabby, and that's who she's going to be staying with while she's in LA until she gets the job, till she gets settled and can get her own place. They end up going out for a drink with some of their old high school friends, and also Hannah's high school boyfriend Ethan. So Hannah has thought for a long time that one of the main reasons that her and Ethan didn't work was more of just like a timing thing. They broke up in high school and he went to college, like that very classic story we hear all the time. And she has just become very focused on the fact that the only reason that happened was because of the timing of it. Not that they were kind of incompatible, but also not so much that she is now like, I'm gonna make sure this happens. She is happy to kind of leave it up to fate, if that makes sense. So they end up at this bar, and at midnight Hannah is faced with two options. She can either go with Gabby to go back home, or she can stay out, and Ethan has said he will take her home. What then happens is the book splits into two timelines, and we go through what happens in Hannah's life if she went with Gabby, what happens in Hannah's life if she went with Ethan, and we get to see kind of the two storylines that happen from that. So I found this really interesting. There's not really much I can say about this book beyond that, because otherwise it definitely gets into spoiler territory. I found it really interesting. I found the concept really interesting, like as a whole, like what a crazy thing to kind of write. However, it wasn't my absolute favorite book. I definitely found it just not sticking in my head too much. I would put it down and then not really remember like what timeline I was in and things like that, which is just not something I personally want when I'm reading a book. I don't know about you guys. Especially with the timelines, it got confusing because like the chapters weren't labeled. They are literally just like, I'll show you on the first chapter so that there's no spoilers. But like literally, hopefully you can see, I don't have my viewfinder out. But like, yeah, literally like they don't have chapters. So it made it kind of confusing. Like I found that the first paragraph, I'd be remembering what timeline I was in and what happened in that timeline, because it would be every other chapter that it would change. So just trying to remember it all like after going to bed and things like that. So I did end up giving it 3.5 stars, mainly for those reasons. But it is written in that kind of typical Taylor Jenkins Reid style, which is a style that I know I genuinely or generally typically enjoy. So I definitely found myself getting more into a bit of a fantasy mood as the month went on, and as I started to think a lot more about like the autumn months. So I decided to pick up Red Queen by Victoria Avard. So I had seen a lot of comparisons to this and Powerless online, which is what made me really intrigued about this series and this book as a whole. So to start with, I personally don't get too many of the comparisons, aside from the fact that there are two groups of people, one with powers and one without. Obviously in Powerless, like you're not allowed to not have powers, you get kicked out. So they're kind of the main similarities I saw personally. There's a couple scenes like where there's like a ballroom scene and something happens at the ball, but like I would say the relationships as a whole feel really, really different in this series. Especially as I've gone through more of the series, I really don't see the similarities personally. So I just thought I would get that out there. But I did enjoy this. I gave this 4 stars and I enjoyed the overall story. I definitely enjoyed the plot a lot more than the romance. For me, so far this whole series, the romance has really been lacking to the point where it makes it quite unbelievable to me, if that makes sense. Yeah, I can't really say too much, but I did enjoy it. I have been reading the series. I've read 3 books from the series this month, so we'll go on to talk about those. But yeah, definitely I would say this is a really good fantasy series. Like if you're not really a fantasy reader, I think if you're a fantasy reader, these won't keep you easily, like these won't be the best. There's plot holes. It moves very fast, but not in like an always good way. Like sometimes it gets really confusing about what's happening. They're okay. They're on Kindle Unlimited. It's a fun read. I definitely think if you've not read fantasy for a while or not at all and you're getting into it, this is probably quite a good series to start with. Speaking of, I did then go straight into Glass Sword, and oh my goodness, I flew through this. This is like 400 pages and I literally read it in like in 2 days. Insane. The plot had me gripped. So much happens in this book. Like the font is really small in all honesty, so like you do kind of like, it is longer than it seems in that way, if that makes sense. But oh my god, it had me absolutely gripped. Like so much happens in this book and I did really enjoy it again. However, this one was, this was another 4 star. Just not absolutely incredible, but not like the absolute worst as well. I can't remember really. This is something I do really struggle with in general in series, unless they're really defined, like what happens. They all get completely blended into one for me. One of the main series I remember, like what happens in each book, is A Curse for True Love. Powerless is very defined for me as well, but like series like the Atlas 6, they get quite blended for me. I think Akatar sometimes, actually Akatar is very defined. Like I like series to be very defined and clear, like each book almost having its own plot, whereas the plot like is these, it's not the same plot, like you're not repeating, but like they really link into each other, like they carry on from like where they left off kind of thing. So after those, I needed a little bit of a break from a fantasy, and I decided to, this is actually for a video that will be coming out like in, I don't know when it's going to come out because I read one book for it and then I've planned to read the rest like the middle of September. So it was a Pinterest picks my reads. So the first book that I got was the 7-Year Slip. So that is what I read. This was a 5-star read for me. This has been absolutely incredible. One of my best reads of the year, especially as like probably my favorite romance of the year. I really enjoyed it. So this is about Clementine, who has just inherited an apartment from her aunt, and growing up her aunt always had stories about how the apartment would slip back in time and she'd go 7 years into the past. Clementine never really believed what she was saying because like why would you? Like when she was a child she did, and then as she got older she definitely didn't believe it as much. So then when it happens and one day there's a strange man in the apartment, she's like, what on earth has gone on? But it turns out the apartment has slipped 7 years back in the past, and then we kind of follow the journey of Clementine and the man in her apartment and how the future timeline is linking up. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this book and the way that it kind of discusses Clementine's grief as well, and I thought it was really interesting, really different concept. I loved Ashley Poston's writing so much. It's very like similar to the way that Emily Henry writes, and it just brought me so much joy. So like yeah, it made me so happy. I would definitely, if you've not read it already somehow, I would definitely give it a read. I feel like this time of year is probably like the perfect time for it. It is set during August, I think. Well, it's set over summer with quite a lot taking place over August, but there's also something that feels very like autumnal about it, probably the magical realism. But yeah, it's such a good read, and actually something that I found really good as like a fantasy filler as well. Okay, so then we went back into the Red Queen series and we picked up King's Cage, which is the 3rd book in the series. So this was a little bit of a lower rating than the others. This was a 3.5 for me. Again, it kind of comes back to the points I was saying earlier about the romance. The romance by this point is forming like a very strong part of the plot, but like it just doesn't feel strong enough to me, and that is kind of the main where I'm at with this series. I have put Warstorm on my September TBR, which is the 4th and final true book in the series, and then there's a novella, well, a book of novellas. But yeah, I'm not kind of sure. I haven't, when I was reading the first 3, I found myself like, I was really obsessed with the plot of what was happening, but it's kind of gotten to a point where I'm like, oh, I don't know, like Warstorm is a really chunky book as well, and yeah, I definitely like have stopped enjoying them as much as I once was when I started the series, so I'm still not 100% sure on my thoughts and feelings of the series as a whole. King's Cage was really interesting. I really liked how it was done. We see some things in that book that we don't see throughout the series, but yeah, it's really hard obviously talking kind of once you get further through a series to like not just give things away, so I can't really talk too much about that one. But I'm just going to talk about like a DNF that I had. I started to do a reread of Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which I was really enjoying. However, I then went into Asda, and one of my most anticipated releases of the year had come early. Daydream. So you may be like, Charlotte, you literally read Wildfire at the start of this month. How is Daydream one of the most anticipated releases of the year for you? Let me tell you, I decided to read the whole series because I saw the marketing of this book. I saw Miss Hallie in that Taylor Swift cardigan that I'm wearing one of the versions of. And I was like, oh, I need to read that. And then I started to hear the description. The description being, Hallie is an aspiring romance novelist, an aspiring novelist in general. However, she is lacking experience in romance as a whole, and in life as a whole, to be honest. Like, Gully's not really had friends. Like, she's had one friend that became her boyfriend, and he is awful. Awful. And she is really struggling to write because she's lacking experience. So our bestie Henry here, where if you've read the first 2 books, you will know how much we love Henry. He comes along and he's like, well, I'll help you. I'll make sure you have some experiences. Ah! The cutest kind of fake dating trope ever. Because, like, tell me why fake dating to, like, where you're not pretending to be a couple for other people. You're just doing date things. Like, you're faking dating. So cute. So wholesome. I absolutely love this book. I can safely say this is my favourite book in the whole entire series so far. I loved these characters. I loved Hallie as a character. I loved Henry as a character. There were so many relatable things about both of these people. All of Hannah's characters are so relatable, and she writes in such, like, oh, I love this series. I really wish that I read it sooner. I would say, if you are watching this, like, why are you talking so much about how good these characters are? Because all I've heard is that these books are really spicy. If you've read Chestnut Springs, these are not spicy in comparison. When people say Icebreaker is the spiciest, and in my opinion, people only say it's spicy because the spice happens early on. The spice only lasts like a few pages compared to like Chestnut Springs and other series and other books like that, where the spice is lasting chapters. I really don't think this is that spicy of a series. The found family in this series is the absolute best thing ever. The epilogue of this book, I do not like epilogues. It is rare for me to like epilogues. The epilogue of this book was everything for the found family. I absolutely adored it. I adored this whole book. Like, I love this friendship group so much. I think this is my favourite friendship group out of any series I have ever read. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I really hope that we're getting more books in this series. I really, really do. But that actually brings me to the end of this video, because those are all of the 9 books that I read in August. Hopefully my stats will have been at the start. Hopefully we were able to do that. But thank you so much for watching. I will have my socials linked down below. I've got my Bookster and my BookTok if you want to find me anywhere else to keep up to date with what I'm reading in the moment. But thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will catch you in the next one. But in the meantime, please give this video a thumbs up because it really does mean the world to me, and also subscribe so I can see you again and catch you in the next one. Bye.